Dev is scrolling through his benefits portal during his lunch break, mostly on autopilot, clicking through the same screens he clicks through every open enrollment. Health insurance, dental, vision, and then a line near the bottom that just says 401k contribution, 3%. He's seen that line a dozen times. He's never actually stopped on it. He doesn't know his company matches 50 cents on the dollar up to 6% of his salary. He's never checked. He just picked 3% 2 years ago because it sounded reasonable and moved on with his day. Here's the part nobody actually sits him down and explains. That gap between what Dev contributes and what his company would match if he contributed more isn't a missed opportunity in some vague someday sense. It's free money sitting there right now that he is actively declining to accept every single paycheck indefinitely until he changes one number in a settings menu. This isn't a video telling you to max out your retirement account or live on rice and beans to save more. It's a video about the one specific number that, if you're leaving it on the table, is genuinely one of the most expensive mistakes in personal finance, precisely because it doesn't feel like a mistake at all. Let me show you the math. My name is Alex, and I spend a genuinely unreasonable amount of time looking at where people's money quietly vanishes to, or in this case, where free money is quietly going unclaimed. If you've ever glanced past the 401k match line on a benefits page without really reading it, hit subscribe, because today on Wealth Adjacent, we're taking apart the closest thing personal finance has to a guaranteed no-catch bonus. Before we go further, a quick disclaimer. I'm not a financial advisor, this isn't financial advice, and every company's specific match formula is different, so nothing here is a universal number. It's a framework for finding your own. What I am here to do is make sure you actually know your own match formula, because a surprising number of people genuinely don't, and that single gap in knowledge is costing real money every single pay period. Let's introduce someone. Dev, late 20s, works in operations, has had a 401k available to him for 3 years. He's not ignoring it out of carelessness. He actually does contribute, which already puts him ahead of people who opt out entirely. He just never confirmed the specific match formula, assumed his 3% was probably fine, and never revisited that assumption once. Let's start with the number, because it is genuinely a little unhinged. A meaningful share of employees with access to an employer 401k match contribute less than the amount needed to receive the full match, meaning they're voluntarily forfeiting money their employer has already budgeted and set aside specifically for them. Let me say that again. This isn't money the company might give you if you ask nicely. It's money already allocated in the compensation plan, waiting for you to claim it by contributing your own share, and a large number of people simply never do. Where does this gap actually come from? A meaningful share of employees say they genuinely don't know their company's exact match formula, some percentage of some percentage, phrased in language that sounds more like a tax form than a benefit. Another share got auto-enrolled at a low default contribution rate when they were hired, often 2 or 3%, and never revisited that number even after raises, promotions, or years of tenure. And the rest fall into the same "I'll increase it later" pattern we've talked about before on this channel. A real intention that quietly never gets acted on because there's no specific date attached to it. And here's the part that should make you sit up. An employer match isn't just a nice benefit. It functions as an instant, guaranteed return that essentially nothing else in personal finance can match. If your $100 paycheck, lijntjeden, $50 contributing enough to capture that match means an immediate 50% return on that specific money before the market does anything at all, before a single day of growth. If the match is dollar for dollar, that's an immediate 100% return. There is no stock, no index fund, no investment strategy anywhere that reliably promises that kind of immediate guaranteed return, and people are leaving it unclaimed because a line on a benefits portal didn't feel urgent enough to click on. But not knowing your match formula isn't the trap by itself. Confusion is just confusion. Here's where it becomes a trap. A significant share of people who eventually do check their match formula discover they've been under-contributing for years, not months, years, meaning the unclaimed match money didn't just sit there, waiting, it's genuinely gone, a benefit that expires every single pay period it isn't claimed. And the genuinely uncomfortable stat sitting right next to it, the average unclaimed match amount, compounded over a full career instead of a single year, routinely reaches well into six figures by retirement age. Read that twice. This isn't a video about saving a few $100s. It's a video about a six-figure gap that most people don't even know they're standing inside of. Back to Dev. His company matches 50 cents on the dollar up to 6% of his salary. He's been contributing 3% for 2 years. That means for 2 full years, he's been forfeiting an amount equal to 1.5% of his salary. Every single paycheck, money his company had already set aside, specifically for him, and he simply never claimed. On his salary, that gap works out to roughly $1,800 a year in unclaimed match, which means over those 2 years, he's left close to $3,600 sitting on the table, money that will never retroactively become his, because unlike a missed bonus, there's no year-end reconciliation for an unclaimed 401k match. It's just gone, quietly, every pay period, forever. He is not the exception. Most people who finally sit down and check their exact match formula discover a real, specific gap between what they're contributing and what would capture the full match. And the overwhelming majority say they had no idea the gap existed until they actually looked. Now here's the part that turns this from a paperwork problem into a psychology problem. And this is the part that should genuinely fascinate you once you see it clearly. This runs on the exact same present bias mechanism we've talked about before. The tendency to value immediate comfort over future benefit, even when the future benefit is enormous and essentially guaranteed. But there's a specific twist here that makes it even sneakier than most present bias traps. Increasing your 401k contribution involves a real, if small, immediate cost, a slightly smaller paycheck, starting today, while the benefit, that guaranteed match, feels abstract and distant because it's locked away in a retirement account you won't touch for decades. Your brain weighs the small, immediate, concrete cost far more heavily than the large, guaranteed, but delayed benefit, even when the math overwhelmingly favors taking the deal. A researcher studying retirement savings behavior found something almost too honest. Employees consistently underestimate how much they're leaving unclaimed, specifically because the match doesn't arrive as a single, visible check with a number on it. It arrives quietly, folded into a retirement balance they rarely look at closely, which makes the missing money almost impossible to notice without deliberately going looking for it. And then there's the specific mechanism that makes match confusion so persistent. Match formulas are often written in language that's technically precise but genuinely unclear to a non-specialist. Phrases like 50% match on the first 6% of eligible compensation, which requires doing actual math just to figure out the one number that actually matters. What percent should I personally be contributing to capture all of it? Most benefits portals don't do that calculation for you. They just show you the confusing formula and assume you'll figure it out, which a meaningful share of people simply never do. Now, before we go further, we still haven't gotten to the specific default setting trap that quietly locks people into under-contributing for years without a single active decision. Hold that thought, because first, the smaller leaks. Let's talk about the phrase that should trigger alarm bells the moment you see it during onboarding. Auto-enrolled at a default rate. Many employers now automatically enroll new hires into a 401k at a low default percentage, often 2 or 3%, specifically because auto-enrollment dramatically increases participation. That's genuinely good policy. Participation goes up. But the default rate itself is frequently set below the amount needed to capture the full match. And because it happens automatically, it doesn't feel like a decision that needs revisiting. It feels like the plan already handled itself. Then there's the vesting schedule confusion, a separate issue from the match percentage that often gets tangled up with it. Some employer matches vest gradually over several years, meaning if you leave the company before that point, you may not keep the full matched amount. That's a real legitimate factor worth understanding, but it sometimes gets used incorrectly as a reason to avoid contributing enough to capture the match at all. When in most cases the smarter move is still to capture the match and simply understand your specific vesting timeline, rather than forfeiting free money to avoid a risk that may not even apply to your situation. There's a job change version of this pattern worth naming too, since it tends to compound the confusion rather than resolve it. Every time someone switches employers, they typically start over with a brand new match formula, a brand new default contribution rate, and a brand new benefits portal to learn, which means the "I'll figure it out eventually" habit gets a fresh excuse to reset with every job change. Someone who never got around to checking their match at one job frequently just repeats the exact same pattern at the next one, treating each new job's onboarding paperwork the same way they treated the last, as something to click through rather than actually read. There's a raise timing version of this pattern too, one that compounds the problem specifically. When people get a raise, contribution percentages often stay exactly the same, meaning the dollar amount going toward retirement increases along with everything else, which feels like progress. But if that percentage was already below the match threshold, a raise doesn't fix the gap. It just makes the same proportional gap slightly bigger in absolute dollar terms, all while feeling like retirement savings are moving in the right direction. And then, the actual default setting trap that locks in the years-long gap. Once someone is auto-enrolled at a below-match percentage, there's no natural trigger that ever prompts them to check whether that number is correct. No annual reminder, no red flag, nothing on a pay stub says you're leaving money unclaimed. The system that got them enrolled at all was designed for participation, not optimization, and closing that specific gap requires a deliberate, active decision that nothing in the process naturally produces on its own. All right, here's the section nobody wants anywhere near a calculator when a 401k match line gets glossed over. Let's do this through Dev, because abstract numbers slide right off the brain. Say instead of leaving that $1,800 a year unclaimed, Dev had captured the full match from year one, investing that full matched amount at a conservative 8% average return. Left alone for 30 years until retirement age, that $1,800 a year in previously unclaimed match becomes roughly $204,000, entirely separate from anything Dev contributed himself, purely from the employer match he was already entitled to and simply never claimed. Here's the framework I want you to carry around. The real cost of under-contributing to your match isn't the small percentage gap on your pay stub. It's that gap compounded at your employer's expense for the rest of your working life, multiplied by however many years pass before someone actually checks the number. A 1% contribution gap sitting unclaimed for a decade isn't a 1% mistake. It's a genuinely enormous mistake wearing a boring, forgettable line item as a disguise. And now here's where it gets almost cruel. If under-contributing to capture a match were ever actually the financially smarter move, you could defend the confusion. It basically never is. Research comparing employees who capture their full match against those who don't finds the gap in retirement outcomes is one of the most consistent, predictable differences in long-term savings behavior. Precisely because an instant 50 to 100% guaranteed return has no honest competitor anywhere else in a typical person's financial life. Now, let me keep my promise, because I am not telling anyone to contribute money they genuinely don't have. I can already hear the objections, because I get them every time I make a video like this. First, but I need that money for bills right now. I can't just reduce my paycheck. Fair point. And if that's truly your situation, this doesn't apply to you yet. That's a real constraint, not confusion. But notice the actual question worth asking, honestly. Is the constraint truly zero available room, or is it that the match line simply never got looked at closely, enough to know exactly how small an increase would actually close the gap? Second, but retirement is decades away. There are more urgent things to handle first. Also fair, and also worth naming directly, this isn't about deprioritizing today's real needs. It's specifically about making sure that whatever amount you've already decided to contribute is at minimum hitting the match threshold first, before any additional retirement saving. Beyond that point, the actual answer was never sacrifice today's needs for tomorrow's retirement. It's know your exact number, and make sure whatever you're already contributing clears that specific bar first. There's a third point worth naming honestly too, one that makes the match first case even stronger. Depending on the type of account, that same contribution often also reduces your taxable income today, meaning part of the cost of increasing your contribution isn't even a full dollar-for-dollar hit to your take-home pay in the first place. A lot of people picture the match as the only benefit stacked on top of their own contribution, when there's frequently a second, immediate benefit sitting quietly underneath it that most benefits portals also don't bother explaining clearly. So here's the framework I'd actually use. I call it the match first rule, and you can apply it in about 5 minutes. Find your plan's actual match formula in writing, not from memory, not from what a coworker mentioned once. Calculate the exact contribution percentage required to capture the full match. Confirm your current contribution meets or exceeds that number. And if it doesn't, increase it to that number specifically, not necessarily higher, just enough to stop forfeiting money that's already been set aside for you. A few practical moves fall out of that. Set a recurring calendar reminder to recheck your match percentage every time you get a raise, since that's specifically when the proportional gap tends to reopen without anyone noticing. If your contribution was set by auto-enrollment, treat that as a starting point to verify, not a decision someone already made correctly on your behalf. And if you genuinely can't afford the full match amount today, increase your contribution by even 1% now, and set a specific date, not a vague intention, to increase it again. So here's where we land. The 401k match trap isn't a story about anyone being careless or bad with money. It's a story about a genuinely generous benefit, quietly designed in a way that makes it easy to underclaim and hard to notice you're doing it. The data doesn't say you need to overhaul your entire financial life to fix this. What it says is quieter and far more useful. A 5-minute check of one specific number, done once, and then rechecked after every raise, tends to be one of the single highest return financial actions most people will ever take, precisely because nothing else in personal finance offers a guaranteed return this large. And if you're dev right now, looking at that same benefits portal line you've scrolled past a dozen times, hear this clearly. You're not careless, and you're not bad with money. You ran into a benefit specifically designed around participation rather than optimization, one that quietly assumes you already know a formula that most companies never actually explain clearly. Of course you missed it. Almost everyone does at first. Seeing it clearly is most of the battle. So Dev opens his benefits portal again, this time actually reading the match formula instead of scrolling past it, does the 5 minutes of math, and increases his contribution from 3% to 6%, capturing the full match starting with his very next paycheck. His take-home pay drops by a genuinely small amount. His retirement account starts receiving free money it was always entitled to and simply wasn't claiming. Spend on the contribution that actually clears your match threshold. Skip the confusion that was never really about the money at all, just about a formula nobody explained clearly. And check that number again every time your salary changes, because the gap has a way of quietly reopening exactly when you'd least expect it. And the next time you're scrolling through a benefits portal and your eyes start to glaze over at the 401k section, remember that boring line item is the closest thing to free money most people will ever be offered, and it expires, unclaimed, every single pay period. Nobody checks it. If this helped, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, did you already know your exact match formula, or are you about to go check it right now? I'll see you in the next one.